Welcome to our online Sunday service at First Unitarian Church of St. Louis. Hello, my name is Sarah Dashner. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am so glad to see you all here this morning. I especially want to welcome any visitors or newcomers. If you are new to our congregation, please fill out a newcomer's form found at the link in the chat window. In the chat, you can also find a few other useful links, including today's order of service, our YouTube channel where the service recordings are posted each week, and information about our religious education program for families with children. We are also excited to announce that closed captioning is now available within Zoom. To turn on captions, simply click the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen and select Show Subtitles, or if you don't want that and you have it on, Hide Subtitles. You can adjust the size of the text by clicking on Subtitle Settings. We invite you to light your own chalice at home when we come to the chalice lighting portion of the service. If you don't have a chalice, you can use a candle. We're also looking for members, friends, and families to record chalice lightings for the worship. See your e-news for details. I have just a few announcements this morning. With COVID restrictions in place, we have postponed our weekly social witnessing for Black Lives Matters until it is safer to gather. Our thanks today to Margaret Weck, serving as tech volunteer. Now, since one of the important aspects of fellowship is to be present in community, we invite you to continue this moment of welcome by switching to gallery view and turning on your webcams to wave to each other. We keep everyone muted, but feel free to type your greetings in the chat. It is so good to see all of you. Now, please turn off your webcams again and feel free to return to speaker view. Welcome to this religious community where we affirm the dignity and freedom of all who enter. Here we seek to live together in relationship and respect so that we may embrace and celebrate our differences. Our religious values invite us to a shared journey of truth, meaning, sincerity, and connection. Guide our religious community and call us into deeper association with ourselves and our world. Welcome. We are glad you are part of our community this morning. Now join us for our music by organist Earl Naylor, Noam Komm der Heiden Heiland.
Good morning. I'm Dwight Homer, he, his, and I'm a member of this congregation. It's good to be with you this morning. We come together this morning to claim again those things we miss in physical fellowship, knowing that our best course is the loving course, whose aim is the preservation of all that's best in our community. We're joined today in the certainty that church is about more than the building we cannot visit in this COVID-damaged year that we hope will pass and leave us both strengthened and unharmed. Now on this Advent Sunday, we meet in a new communion, based on our highest aspirations to bring our gifts of love to all within this greater community. Yes, we must join together while remaining safely apart, but we rejoice in thankfulness for all we continue to have as we await the returning sun in this darkest season of the year. This morning, we wait on the vision of incarnation and the coming birth and rebirth of the year. Amen. Now please join us in singing our hymn of the month, 317, We Are Not Alone.
We are not alone, earth forms us, human leaves on nature's growing vine, fruit of many generations, seeds of life divine. We are not alone, earth names us, past and present peoples near and far, family and friends and strangers, show us who we are. Therefore let us make thanksgiving, and with justice willing and aware, give to earth and all things living liturgies of care. Let us be a house of welcome, living stone upholding living stone, gladly showing all our neighbors we are not our own.
Quoted from Dag Hammarskjöld, the second Secretary General of the United Nations. Each morning, we must hold out our chalice of our being to receive, to carry, and give back.
One of the gifts that we give to one another is listening to each other's joys and concerns. We celebrate again with Bob and Kathy Roginski on the announcement of the birth of their 10th grandchild, Luca Gerard Bilyuk. Parents, daughter Liz, and husband Derek Bilyuk are very happy and doing well. We send again our deep condolences to Carl Bassi and his family. Carl's mother passed away earlier this month. We offer our sincere sympathy to Tom Craddock, whose brother passed away this month. As we pause in a moment of quiet reflection, I invite you to type any sorrows or concerns you're experiencing into the group chat box. This week, we will be reading and abiding by these in silence, and we hold these sorrows with tenderness and compassion. As a community, we also share our joys with one another. Again, I invite you to type any joys you wish to share with the group chat box. We hold these joys with gladness and celebration. May they be magnified because they are shared. With many joys and concerns unspoken in our hearts and minds, please join me in a moment of prayer and meditation. The title of this meditation is Remembering Church Amid Pandemic, Meditation on Crowdsourced Love. We might be in a circle in a line of chairs with eyes closed. We might guess the shape of our hearts. As the slowly gathered breath allowing each the privilege of beating the shade behind our eyes more slowly. Together, a room of us, in a nestle of knees and shoes, ankles crossing or not, resting in the morning light. We wait and breathe and listen and consider the silence before speaking. In the aftermath of a moment of street noise, of breathing together. Today, we might be in a circle. We might be in a line of pews. In this moment between times, as we give consideration to the shape of our hearts and the hearts of our companions. It will be enough in the next hour if we can break the silence of our shyness. It will be enough to sing and speak with some we barely know. It will be enough to bring voice to a hymn or a reading meant to invoke an answer and with luck to gain the effect of understanding. It will be enough to expect nothing but the companionship of curiosity, the I and thou of paying attention to one another, daring ourselves to listen amid the silence of our feelings. We might be at a table. We might be in a line for coffee. To have our wits deployed for the mission at hand. It may serve us well to have remembered this time, this intermediation of silence, remembering our hearts, beating back the shadows more slowly now as we raise our heads, opening our eyes, and drinking in the light that streams across the room. We might be in a circle, we might be in a line of chairs, eyes open now to the prospect of fellowship, turning one to the next, grateful for the gaze of our neighbors, glad of the peace that changes everything, in the air that will carry the stories now, moments before they're told. There's nothing to fear. We who have already taken stock of ourselves, awakened to the chance of conversation. All life really lived is encounter. We lean in that direction. Together, we are the better angels of our being. We belong together. They are ourselves. Amen, and blessed be. It is the mission of the First Unitarian Church of St. Louis to work for love, decency, tolerance, and justice. In this time of pandemic, the church continues in that mission. We are not passing a physical plate, but there are many ways to donate, including by mail, online, or with our Text to Give program. These are uncertain times. Please give as you can.
Oh, come, Emmanuel.
Morning's reading includes my commentary together with texts from the letters of the poet John Keats, Keats on soul making. Negative capability was described by John Keats as occurring, quote, when a man is capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. In Keats' mind, this was in no way a form of irrationalism, but rather it was his way of accounting for the ways a sympathetic imagination operates, especially under duress, as when conditions are uncertain and the humanity of the circumstances outweighs the sense that a given state of affairs ought to have one just and suitable outcome. Contradiction is a natural state of affairs in this negatively capable condition in which people and events may be seen to stand in precarious balance, as if for a moment they are as much siblings as adversaries. Keats' approach was conditioned by his horrific personal situation, as first his mother and then his brother Thomas succumbed to the tuberculosis that was to very shortly kill Keats himself at the age of 25. Above all, Keats was interested in creating bridges of sensibility between contradictory states of mind. His goal was to be a great poet on the model of Shakespeare, and negative capability was at bottom his method of appropriating what he believed to be the nexus of Shakespearean art. Moreover, for him, it clearly worked. In that same year, 1819, slightly more than 200 years ago, Keats produced all of his great odes to Psyche, to Nightingale, to Melancholy, On a Grecian Urn, and the Ode to Autumn, which constitute his extraordinary, very brief, yet matchless poetic maturity. Keats' willingness to embrace contradiction and adversity through the power of negative capability carried as well into this notion he had of soul making, which he described in a famous letter to his brother George, who had recently emigrated to America. Offered in direct opposition to Christian passivity and resignation, he wrote, "Call the world, if you will, the veil of soul making. I say soul making using the word soul as distinguished from an intelligence. Do you not see how necessary a world of pain and trouble is to school an intelligence and make it a soul? A place where the heart must feel and suffer in 1,000 diverse ways. Not merely is the heart a hornbook, it is the mind's Bible, it is the mind's experience, it is the teat from which the mind or intelligence sucks its identity." I can think of no better example of Keats of a mind operating in with every channel open to what the universe offers as he strives to form a successful attitude against what he knew to be his terminal illness. I would follow Keats in embracing negative capability as a method that aims to overcome the isolation of human experience. Young as he was, Keats was a creature of his crowded London upbringing, living as he did amid what he called the thoroughfare of all thoughts, and seeking, in spite of his illness, to stretch himself beyond the deterministic constraints and narrowing contexts, limiting the growth of the imagination. His model was Shakespeare, the myriad-minded, his term, who he admired for the variety and richness of his characters, as well as for the music of his language, writing again to his brother George, that perhaps he takes us no further than this, that with a great poet, the sense of beauty overcomes every other consideration, or rather obliterates all consideration. Here ends the reading. My subject this morning is consciousness and self and the human enterprise of soul making. I begin with D.H. Lawrence's famous call for a poetry of the present. "Don't give me the infinite or the eternal," wrote Lawrence. "Say nothing of infinity, nothing of eternity. Give me the still, white, seething, the incandescent, and the coldness of the incarnate moment, the quick of all change and haste and opposition, the moment, the immediate present, the now." It occurs to me that little by little, our conscious lives are being transformed by our smartphones and tablets, so that in our perhaps obsessive pursuit of the moment, many of us have become something like unconscious Buddhists, living half awake amid this crazy, self-disclosing, trend-obsessed culture of ours. Certainly the quick of all change and haste and even opposition is with us in spades in all the ways we cultivate our connections, that for many have become the currency of their e-lives. It's been plausibly suggested, thanks to smartphones and in all of human history, there's never been so much access to the relatively raw content of other minds. In truth, it's amazing how public many of us have become on Facebook and the other sharing sites, from Instagram and Reddit to Twitter, on our laptops and smartphones, with masses of content that now get routinely shared. And yes, it does make a difference to the quality of our lives. The photographs we now can see and share, and the video. We're connected to our moments more profusely, if not profoundly, than ever before. And though we have more contact with other minds than ever before, we still know very little about those lives, even with as much lived experience so readily on display. Cellular biology and neurophysiology keep improving all the time, but we're still largely ignorant when it comes to explaining conscious experience, let alone the rich tapestry of our visual, auditory, and sensory awareness. We've learned to accept that our minds are somehow the consequences of brain activity. We know just how fragile the apparatus of our senses and memory and understanding actually are. It took centuries to learn, and many of us still refuse to believe that our conscious lives are not imposed upon us by some divine interlocutor who overhears our mental traffic, serving as that still small voice operating below the surfaces of our waking lives. According to psychophysicists and cognitive researchers, each of us operates at the center of a personal temporality, experiencing the present in discrete increments that last roughly 3 seconds and strung together with a resonating sense of time extending through what they call functional moments that last roughly 78 seconds or 1.3 minutes. To be sure, it has never been easy to imagine where the present moment begins and ends. If we think about it, we have not evolved our thinking about time consciousness very far from St. Augustine's 1,500-year-old assessment, which still sounds very contemporary. If any moment of time be conceived which cannot now be divided into even the minutest particles of moments, wrote Augustine, this only is that which may be called present, that flies so rapidly from future to past that it cannot be extended by any delay. For if it be extended, it is divided into the past and future, but the present has no space. For us then, time's arrow flies through these narrow windows of functional moments, wherein each of us eventually belongs to herself. How this happens will be the subject of this morning's discussion. Mind you, I have almost no answers, but lots of questions concerning what is to be made of my own experience of time and consciousness. If anything, I'm buzzing on a new frequency, and I'm unsure as to whether its nature is philosophical or theological, or if it matters. One thing that seems certain is that as I get older and crankier, I am increasingly aware of the precious and fragile nature of the consciousness I do possess. I find that understanding time shaking the branches of whatever about physics and philosophy of mind that I'm able to understand, is all related to questions that suddenly mean more than I ever realized. A certain mutability I've experienced recently as I creep into my 70s has contributed an increased sense of urgency. I feel an intense need to know more. And that led me to Daniel Dennett, whose 1992 book, Consciousness Explained, expounded on his very compelling theory about what he calls the multiple drafts model of consciousness. Dennett's idea is that conscious life is a fragmentary and provisional process that unfolds in multiple drafts, versions, if you will, of a continuously evolving narrative that accrues as we process the details of our unfolding heterogeneous moments. There's no one set of inputs operating at any kind of central location, either of activity, attention, or importance, except as might seem to us at any given moment. Confusing, slippery stuff to think about, but fun, I think. Who has not felt themselves composing their lives in piecemeal, sometimes quite successfully continuous in its consistency, and at others in a hodgepodge of impressions, proceeding very much by improvisation? Dennett's theory of multiple drafts seems to have ignited a robust argument among consciousness researchers and philosophers who have found much to argue with in its vision of consciousness as multiple drafts, whose unfinished features are continually assembled and reassembled in memory as we summon them along the way of our passages through life. To me, as a writer, this is especially interesting as it almost perfectly maps to the way almost any formal and not so formal composition is carried through to completion. In essence, what Dennett's telling us is that mindful living involves a continual process of awakening to the shape of our experience, and then putting that growing understanding to work as we find our ways through attending and assembling our conscious lives as we go. Somewhat, not so very different from Buddhist mindfulness practice, I would say. It's mostly empirical, almost anti-spiritual in its conduct, as he describes it. The multiple drafts model makes the process of writing down in memory a criteria for consciousness, creating as we go a map of what it is for the given to be taken. Memory provides the anchor of consciousness in ways that we don't at first realize as it registers and writes down the physical enactments of sense experience, and not as a kind of sequel or after effect of the brain's network activity, but the network itself in the act of networking. Think about that metaphor for a moment. We are each of us a hive of network activity, in which case consciousness is both medium and message, to paraphrase McLuhan, serving as the vehicle of life's content in a way that our senses and the data that they apprehend and process form both the essence of awareness itself and the effect and the effects they register. Short-term memory and working memory carry a great deal of the freight of daily living. And many of us who have aging parents have learned the hard way that when undermined by disease or trauma, that failure of immediate working memory is what steals a person's sense of who they are as a confident creature who makes sense and has purpose. But memory as the vehicle of life's content is also the principal material for any investigation into what is meant by mindfulness, especially as we seek to discover meaning in the sense of having and leading spiritual lives without a deity or a creed to hold the enterprise up. According to Dennett, consciousness happens without mediation, such that what we see and hear and become are at once the given of our being, the how and who we are, that manage to form together what we experience as our continuous, more or less unified present, our now. As a writer, I have a profound and growing respect for the power of the sympathetic imagination and what John Keats called negative capability, which he saw as involving a willingness to imagine and apprehend and even inhabit other minds, tolerating their otherness, working to understand their difference from us, while embracing the drama of difference that contradiction brings. This is important first because a sympathetic imagination is what gives birth to compassion, but also because it can be argued that it is the source of all genuine creativity, starting with the raw but profound alertness to the stubborn presence of reality itself. This is the end of part one.
Brightest and best of the sons of the morning, dawn on our darkness and lend us thine aid. Let's take the last, the very last page, Angels Adore.
The first time through when it's still pretty loud. I'll give you the measure before.
Yeah. Angels adore him in slumber reclining, Maker and Monarch and Savior of all.
Looking into sense and memory as incrementally developmental gives us a basis for trusting what our memories are able to respond and to respond to and write down as we create our narratives of being. For it is these that we keep and share with our companions and our children. That is, when we're intentional enough to notice them. And while I'm sure that Dennett's concept of consciousness as unfolding in multiple drafts is designed to describe his micro-mechanics of the processes of consciousness, I find myself rather happily adopting its framework, the considerations of good old-fashioned storytelling, giving more finished and more craftsman-like consideration of the language and writing, giving more finished and more craftsman-like considerations of language and writing their due as a frontline activity in the recovery of memory and experience. These I have to apologize for at least a little, as they are decidedly less granular than Dennett's practices and technical vocabulary. This is the point of our discussion, this is the point in our discussion this morning where I'd like to segue from micro to macro and from dealing with giving moment by moment shape to the given into considering how we assemble our drafts into something like identity in a process that John Keats described as soul making. Dennett reminds us that in his registration of reality as multiple drafts is in no way especially clean and unitary in the sense of a photographic record. And it's true that as good as certain gifted individuals can be with their photographic memories and their eidetic imagery, most of us are intrinsically provisional in our sense making. We are creatures of trial and error, and what could be more human than that? More to the point, the truth of an experience, however particular, is and will be subject to more or less continuous revision in the sense that we write down its appurtenances in a piecemeal rather than a single transcendent blast of apprehension. And then as it happens over time, our recollections evolve. We find ourselves knowing more or seeing our histories more clearly, or not. Hence the value of recognizing that these remain drafts, unfinished work. However, and this is important, charismatic events happen to us, good and bad, and often enough in everyone's life to keep us attentive to, if not enthusiastic about, what Wordsworth called spots of time, those moments of meaning that sometimes hammer our lives into the shapes they take for good or for ill. In the case of Keats, the matter was complicated by, on one hand, his desperate personal circumstances, and yet on the other, his gift for embracing the beauty, together with the adversity, fed his heart and shaped his imagination in extraordinary ways. Meanwhile, for most of us, it remains the case that most of the time, the norm is rather more normal, and apprehension duller and more deliberate. This mostly means, in the end, that consciousness, information processing happen to us piecemeal, swelling and shrinking in significance as certain moments arrive to usurp our attention, as something sufficiently momentous happens to us. In most cases, the more profound the occurrence, the more detailed our recollection. The bottom line here is that this is what makes the conscious act of writing down our experiences so difficult. In the end, selection governs everything, and perhaps talent, and in this case, in the case of Keats, genius comes down to possessing a gift for choosing the compelling details, the sexy bits, if you will, that resonate in the imagination and that everyone prefers to read. And this takes us to a definition that I hope illustrate both the challenge and the opportunity that comes with paying close attention to the content of our experience. Among Dennett's contributions in pursuit of his multiple drafts theory of consciousness is his re-examination of certain very useful terms of somewhat technical philosophical vocabulary. Among these, qualia keep improving in usefulness. Qualia are discrete instances of inescapably subjective experience. The term derives from the Latin adverb qualis, denoting that something is of a certain kind. Always plural, qualia are subjective experiences that we can't describe so much as declare to others in the expectation of immediate recognition of a very specific commonality. One of the simplest definitions is what it's like character of mental states, the way it feels to have the experience of toothache pain, or of seeing a particular shade of red, or the unique perfume of gardenia, etc. According to Dennett, qualia have certain important properties. Qualia are ineffable, even in some ways mysterious, such that they are hard to communicate except in terms of a very direct experience. Qualia are private, meaning that all interpersonal comparisons of qualia are manifestly difficult or impossible to share. Here I have to quarrel somewhat with the categorical nature of some of Dennett's attributions. I would contend, for example, that one person's ineffable is another's familiar turf. Poets like Keats and Baudelaire, or Sylvia Plath, for example, or a novelist like Tolstoy, or a painter like Van Gogh. Masters of edgy defamiliarization come to mind as eminently capable of domesticating the so-called ineffable. These artists turn the ordinary into something visionary, or conversely, turn the unprecedented or previously unimagined into something absolutely palpable. They make the familiar strange and the strange strangely familiar. Philosophically, it seems to me, we get in trouble when we insist too strongly on the privacy of private experience, or give too much credence to the incommunicability of certain powerful experiences. I would argue that among the purposes of art is the capture of time itself, to seize the ephemeral, holding it fast in the mind, mapping the subjective features of an experience in such a way as to give it something like universal currency. In essence, it is to give the unspeakable a name, or to render light, for example, the way that Rembrandt or Caravaggio was able to represent its special mystery, its majesty and beauty. The fact that we can't always succeed sustains perhaps the philosopher's concept of the ineluctability of qualia, but it doesn't guarantee insurmountability. Thinking in small again about Dennett's theory of multiple drafts as a process of building out our being from the raw materials of sense experience, it may not be such a stretch to think in terms of a process that has legs, as it were, with cumulative import in the formation of personhood, and what Keats in his letter to his brother George described as soul making, as what's accomplished when the given is taken, as Dennett puts it, and made subject to a deeper understanding. For it is this gift of interpretation, to give shape to impressions and making judgments about them, that is key. In the end, our judgments about them, and in the end, our experiences give rise to a succession of discriminations, forming an arc whose outcomes behave very much like the outline of a story. Like any description of being, the multiple drafts model understands consciousness as taking time to occur. We don't experience our senses as fully realized, but rather as incremental impressions. According to Dennett, consciousness is the consequence of a networked blend of auditory, visual, tactile, and olfactory inputs, rather than some singular and executive point of view that's capable of assembling and interpreting experience. There's no singular personage, no playwright assembling or framing our story, no central experiencer conferring her durable stamp on any of the drafts, let alone the finished version or self that does the experience. While that may be the case, our dispositions are nevertheless inclined toward creating a kind of order. We prefer certainties to their opposite. And so if our several parts are endlessly gathering sensory details and evidence, our shape-giving desire for integration pushes us to notice likeness and pattern because they exist and give us clues as to our whereabouts on one hand and significance on the other. We see what stands out. We remember what is most definite, that matters enough to remain with us longer and enjoy a higher profile and a longer duration in our memories. Inevitably, as we mature as persons, these memories acquire the nature of a profile as we acquire a certain self-referential sensibility, becoming the autobiographical me of everyone's life. Meanwhile, the process of living remains episodic, and mostly for most of us, it feels improvised. Consciousness is thus more like jazz than something more composed and classical. The big stuff, wherein we learn the major lessons of our maturity as we specialize and acquire skills, as we exercise those intrinsic capabilities some call talent, inevitably entail repetition and practice as memory acquires the strengths of habit and conditioning. We increase the weight and the challenge of the movements involved, and our muscles and nerves deliver degrees of mastery. At some point, that which required both a certain salience to be seen and a noise to be heard is made conscious. Paradoxically, once we've acquired this mysterious capability called mastery, conscious effort disappears into an effortlessness and instinct. A musician in full possession of a piece will play the sonata and hear and see and feel its form in her fingers. She will not have to remembering it. Moreover, it's probably the case that our dopamine sensors factor into this mix, bringing the brain's system of rewards and pleasure into the picture. Experiencing things is fun, after all, and we often get a boost of energy and attention from its invigorating intensity. And I can second this by saying that I only know what I think when I'm able to share it with myself or someone else. Along with the pleasure principle, I'd venture to guess that there's a social component as well. What we feel as self becomes interested in good reasons for bringing potency and value to the thread of the given. Enough so that we offer it to our companions and we receive theirs in return. Persons become persons, as Martin Buber tells us, through speaking together in dialogue. Finally, I would like not to be reductive about asserting either self or soul as something that's either transcendent or trivial. Both interpretations miss the point of ambiguity, which I would argue is essential to experiencing the pleasure of meaning. The conscious self should be taken to possess a certain intentionality, even though its form is more found than deliberately fabricated. But this having been found is a function of the potency of the inputs and their influence in creating what Dennett refers to as the center of narrative gravity. It becomes the story we tell ourselves about our experiences. The autobiographical me thus emerges as a fiction derived from reality, responding to a resonating stream of events and experiences that may or may not be fully connected to one another, but that awaken our sense of being and provide us with the content of our dreams. Amen. Now, please join us in singing our final hymn, number 226, People Look East. The benediction this morning comes to us from the Buddhist tradition. Be you lamps unto yourselves. Be your own confidence. Hold to the truth that lies within yourself as to the only lamp. Amen, and blessed be.